All right, guys, I'm back. Let's get started. Okay, great. All right. So we actually completed hybrid identity use case, wherein we synchronized on-premises identities from Active Directory domain services that includes your users, your groups, your OU to Microsoft Azure Entra ID. We looked at some custom configurations with respect to other than password enhanced synchronization, the concept of pass-through authentication, the concept of password write-back, and if you have multiple domains, how would you synchronize identities from multiple domains to Entra ID? We looked at custom configuration also. And the entire session got recorded that almost took 3 hours or more than 3 hours, almost 3.5 hours to complete the end-to-end configuration, show you how that configuration is taking effect and the validation of that configuration. So please make sure that you go through the recorded session, practice yourself. If you did not get time yesterday, then probably over the weekend, please make sure that you practice it yourself, configure it yourself in your lab environment to which you have complete access so that you understand the concept. And if you find any deviation from what we discussed, you can definitely bring it to my notice. If there is any additional use case that you have in mind, please go ahead and explore that use case in the lab. If it doesn't go through as per your expectation, or if there are technical challenges, be my guest, share it with me during the training session or probably offline, and we will definitely work towards resolving it. It's a it's a knowledge sharing. Definitely, I will learn something new, or you will learn something new that will help both of us in our professional engagements. So with that said, let's get started with the topics that we need to do today. So yesterday, other than completing the hybrid identity lab, we also looked at SC300 official labs. As I told you, there are a total of 28 labs that we need to complete in this training. We did complete the first two labs yesterday, which is lab zero. Lab zero is nothing but the prerequisites or the mobilization phase wherein you sign up to Microsoft Azure using a free trial or using an Azure sponsorship pass, and then you subscribe to Entra ID P2 trial. So I assume that all of you have already subscribed to Entra ID P2. If not, please let me know if you're facing any issue, because we will soon be doing labs that would require P2 access. And if you don't have subscribed to P2, then you would not be able to do those labs. And if you don't do labs, there is no point of learning theoretical aspects, because theory, when you hear something, you tend to forget within a week. That's how our mind works. You may have very sharp memory. You may probably retain that information for 2 weeks. But a normal human being typically forgets it within 7 days what you hear. If you do it yourself, you will forget it in 30 days. If you do it again and again, you will retain that knowledge throughout your life. That's the concept. And it's a general concept. It is not for technology. So please make sure that you at least practice so that you remember it for a month. And then whenever you feel that that knowledge is fading, that knowledge is kind of uh, disappearing, just continue practicing with it. Even after this training is over, you will have access to the subscription for next couple of days. And once that duration approaches, let's say October 10th, where most of you have access, after that, go ahead and create a free trial account. A free trial account from Microsoft Azure that would give you $200 worth of credit, valid for another 30 days. make sure that you're not using the same Outlook email address, because Microsoft will not give you trial on that email address. Create a new identity and then get another trial. Once that trial is over, create another new identity, get another trial. I have seen a couple of my participants who have been following this method for a long time. Every month they create a new ID, they use somebody else's phone number from from family, and they go ahead and subscribe to a trial. Once that trial is over, they start afresh. They create a new ID once again, they try a new phone number, and they get it. Sometimes if you use the same phone number, Microsoft may reject a trial because they also use phone number as, I would say, as one of the methods for a trial or not, or whether take a trial from Microsoft service in the past. So that becomes the key sometimes. Email address is the key. The primary key is email address, but sometimes phone number also make a difference. Name, your organization, your other information hardly makes any difference because Microsoft doesn't validate that information. So make sure that you continue with this learning journey. And having said that, let's get started for today. So yesterday we did lab number 1, manage user roles, wherein you did all of these activities. If you have not done that lab, I shared these labs as home assignments. So if you have not done that lab, please make sure that you are doing those labs. You can find that information in the chat window that I shared lab number 1 and lab number 3 as home assignment. In the lab number 3, I basically requested you to do it until exercise 2, because exercise 3 basically is about dynamic group that I will explain. You probably have not created dynamic groups in the past, or you've not seen this concept. So I will explain this concept, what dynamic groups are. So that's what I'm going to explain today. However, if you have not done lab number 3, and if you don't have, if you don't have access to chat, I will put that into the chat window once again. This morning, I have put that into the chat window once again. Please go ahead and do lab number 3. If you have not done lab number 1 yesterday, do it today after the session is over, in the evening, or probably in the afternoon today. That's your choice. However, lab number 3 is something that you need to do today. Lab number 3 is about assigning licenses using group membership. It basically involves creating a security group in Microsoft Azure and then assigning license to that security group. Now, when it comes to lab number 3, since these labs contain instructions for simulated environment, and we are doing it in our own environment, so we just need to follow the logic, but not the instructions as they are. For example, what it says that it asks you to create a security group and add a user to it. So you need to create a group and add a user. After that, and this is the user that you need to add. So you can add an existing user, and then they say that try with that user whether user has access to Microsoft Office. So when the user goes to office.com website, user sees that no product or services are visible to user. And then it says, let's go ahead. So it basically says that try with the user and see whether user has access to Microsoft Office. And after that, create a security group, add that user as a member to that security group, and then assign license to that group. Instead of assigning license to user directly, assign license at the group level. And after you assign the license, now in this case, you don't have Office 365. What you have Microsoft Entra ID P2 license. So you will assign P2 license to this user. And after the license is assigned, then you would need to validate the capability. So after the license is assigned to this user, Office 365, the user logs into office.com website once again, and user is able to see all the products of Office, Word, PowerPoint, Excel. So what you will do, you will assign P2 license to the user, and then you will log in with the user and see whether user has access to capabilities which are part of P2, like conditional access, entitlement management, the capabilities that are part of P2. That's how you will confirm. So that's your exercise 1. Then comes exercise 2. This is exercise 2 basically, which is once again creating a Microsoft 365 group. So just skip the exercise 2. I'm saying you can do exercise 2. Exercise 2 is basically for Microsoft 365. We have two types of group. We have security group and we have M365 group. Security group we basically use to group users, group identities, as well as devices, human, non-human identities both. And Microsoft 365 group we basically create when we want to create a common email address, when we want to assign multiple M365 licenses to identities. So that's when we create Microsoft 365 group. So you can see how Microsoft 365 group is created, the same process. And once you're done with this, then comes the exercise number 3, which is creating a dynamic group with all users as members. So you will need to create a dynamic group. Now, this is where I will explain you the concept of dynamic group. So let's go ahead and do the first two part of this exercise, which is understand the process of creating a security group, assigning members to that group, and then assigning existing license at the group level. This is the 3 pieces that you need to do in this exercise, right? So that's what you need to do in this exercise. So for each exercise, as I write, what exactly are you doing? So first thing that you're doing in this exercise is so you are creating a so the first part, let's put it this way, provision a security group, and the entire provisioning you will be doing in Entra Admin Center. I don't need to repeat myself again and again. You will do all the labs from Entra Admin Center. You will only switch to Azure portal when the mentioned capability is not available in Entra. So provision a security group in Entra Admin Center, add members and owner to the group, assign an existing license, whatever license you maintain at the group level. Fourth, provision an M365 group. And fifth, provision a dynamic group and validate its functionality. This is what this lab number 3 is all about. So the first 4 tasks you need to do right now, and the last task I will explain. So let's do that, guys. Okay. So I give you all 15 minutes to complete this exercise. It doesn't take much time. I'm saying if you go by the official lab, it only says 25 minutes, which is first 15 minutes for the first 3 tasks and another 10 minutes for the exercise number 3, which is creating a dynamic group with all users as members. So go ahead and do this.
I've done that, Raghu.
Okay. All right. Can you present your screen and show it to others? How do we assign a license at the group level?
Yeah.
Okay.
Be able to see my screen?
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah. So I created one security group
Mm-hmm.
and I assigned one user to that,
Mm-hmm.
John Doe, and I have assigned the P2 license from the Entra Admin Center.
Where exactly did you assign the license from?
One. This is Admin Center. Where's that? 1 second. Yeah, from not from here. Yeah, from here.
Okay.
Okay. I think the M365 center. 1 second. I don't know where that tab. 1 second.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no worries. The reason I was asking because the process has actually changed. Earlier, you are able to assign license from Entra ID itself. You can assign license from Entra Admin Center also. But now, license assignment is only possible through M365 admin portal or admin.microsoft.com. Assigning license to a group happens in a different manner, which is not mentioned in the lab. So I was curious to see where did you find that option, or would or able to find the option? That's the question.
I actually Googled it, Raghu. I did it from M365 center.
Hmm.
Uh,
Okay, no worries.
I have assigned it. If you want, I can share my screen.
Yeah, please share, Anusha.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, under this admin center, I have gone to this license.
Okay. Hmm.
I have selected this license. Then under the group, I assigned this license. I entered the group name and it got reflected.
Absolutely. So this is the place where you basically assign the license from, uh, because what basically happens when you click on the group name, Anusha, can you click on the groups? So so most of the people would typically, come to this window and see whether they can assign the license. However, you will not find any option to assign a license here because there is no option that says assign license. And when you go to Entra Admin Center, can you navigate to Entra Admin Center also? In Entra, no, this is Azure portal, Entra Admin Center, which is entra.microsoft.com. That's admin portal. So this is one change that you need to be aware of, which Microsoft has done on 15th of this month, which is 4 days before. I'm saying that took effect from 15th of September. However, they had announced it a couple of months ago. So this is Entra Admin Center. When you navigate to groups here, let's navigate to groups, all groups. Okay, select a group. Now over here, you see license option, but when you click on that option, it would basically give you this give you this disclaimer that adding, removing, and reprocessing license assignment is only available within M365 Admin Center. So from now onwards, you will not be able to assign license from Entra portal, I'm saying from Azure portal, from Entra Admin Center, and you will only be able to assign license from M365 Admin Center. Why? I'll tell you the reason for it also. The reason is that any purchase or any subscription that you make from Azure that is basically listed in M365 Admin Center. Now you will say that we are not using M365 services, then why is that going there? The reason could be Microsoft may probably want to expand its M365 adoption to users, and unless it takes those users to that portal, how will it ensure doing that? Now you don't have access to M365, even though you have access to M365 portal, at least from the billing perspective. So you navigate, now go to M365 portal. So you basically navigate to M365 portal. There you will see billing tab. I'm say to your left on the vertical blade, you see billing. Under billing, you see your licenses. That's where you need to navigate to licenses. That's where it will show you the current licenses that you have. Then you click on the licenses. Now you can assign these licenses to security groups, right? You can assign these licenses to group. You can also assign these licenses to users. Can we check if that is available from here? Yeah,
Yes.
click on the name. Any of the, yeah, assign license is available. So you can assign license to both users and groups from this blade also. However, assigning license to user is also available from user blade. So can you navigate to user blade to your left? Yeah. Active users. You can also assign license from here also. Select any of the user
Okay.
and say click on any of the username. Username. Click on the name.
Okay.
Yeah. And here you will also see assignment option. You see license and apps. So you can directly click here. And obviously, when you are assigning the license to a user, location must be provided. So you see the location there, just assign the license. If you have multiple licenses for multiple products of Microsoft, they all will be listed here. You can pick and choose license and assign it to the user. So that's how primarily assign licenses to users and groups in the Microsoft 365 portal, which is admin.microsoft.com. Now, when you work with this portal, click on that those multiple dots to your left, that cube sign. Yeah.
Sir?
On the top. Yeah, cube. Yeah, over here. So this is where you see additional products of Microsoft, right? If you have Microsoft 365 license, you can navigate to Microsoft 365. If you are using products like Microsoft Defender XDR, Microsoft Defender for cloud apps, Microsoft Defender for identity, Microsoft Defender for uh, endpoint, vulnerability management, all those Defender products, or including Microsoft Defender for XDR and Purview, you can click on security. That takes you to security.microsoft.com, right? You can click on security. Then if you are using data governance, I'm saying Microsoft 365 security and compliance is now renamed as Purview. So it basically takes you to Purview portal. So all additional products of Microsoft are basically available here. In security.microsoft.com, you will have access to Defender products, all Defender products of Microsoft or Microsoft security products. Now so the best part is with Microsoft, even you don't have a license, they will still give you the UI access so that you can at least see what all capabilities are available. And if you want to explore, you have an option to subscribe to a trial of that capability. You don't need to provide your payment information, your soul to address any further because it's already there. All you need to do, just share your interest that I want a trial of this capability. Microsoft will give it to you. So that's what you do. Some trials are available for 90 days. Some trials are available for 30 days. So that's
And one more query, Raghvir. We do have 100 license, right? So for the security group, I have assigned one owner and one member. So when I provide the license to this group, my two of the license got detected. So it's like according to the member only, the license is getting activated.
here, license is always assigned to the member, not to the owner.
Okay, so how
Only-
many members are there in the group? The license will get activated to the, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason we are assigning license at the group level so that we can manage our licenses effectively. If you assign licenses at individual user level, it will increase your administrative overhead because what if you have 1,000 users? You will need to navigate to each user to assign a license. And then you will also need to manage that probably in a spreadsheet that, okay, I have these many users assigned these many licenses. So the better option is to group users into a group and then assign license at the group level so that you will only maintain data that I have 20 licenses assigned to this group, 50 licenses assigned to that group. So that basically makes better management. And that's not the only purpose of a group. We also create group for additional use cases, which is to apply security policies to group devices, to group M365. So there are multiple use cases for it group. In fact, other than license, we assign roles to a group also. So we can assign both Entra ID roles, Azure subscription RBAC to a group, rather managing those policies and permissions at individual level. That's what we create groups for. Okay.
Okay, got it.
All right. Let's move on. Now let's look at the dynamic group capability. So I'll present my screen. So for those who are already aware of this capability, it's a refresher for them. And for those who have not used this capability in the past, let's understand the capability. All right. While we are going through the dynamic group membership, we already need to look at one concept in Entra ID, which is known as security defaults. So let's talk about security defaults because you see it here. So remember this screen, which is security defaults. I'll talk about it later. Now you notice that once I'm signed into Microsoft Azure, if I sign into any other portal of Azure, any other portal of Microsoft for whom the identity service provider happens to be Entra ID, it is by default enabled for single sign-on. I don't need to provide credentials for it. So I'm signed into this portal. On the same browser, I sign into another portal. I sign into another portal, which is, let's say, admin.microsoft.com. You will notice that it will not ask me for credentials because it uses the same set of credentials to authenticate to all the portals. I can also open security.microsoft.com. It would not ask me for credentials for any of these portals. They all use the same credentials. The all portal will log in. In fact, even I go to M365, it also comes, it doesn't ask me anything, which is m365.com. So this is M365 portal. This is security portal. If I navigate to any other portal, let's say Purview admin portal, I'm already open. Then I see multiple additional apps which are available, some additional apps which are available for me. So all that information is available. It doesn't ask me for any additional sign-up. Let's understand the dynamic group concept. So what basically happens when we create a group, we add members to that group manually. We add owner to that group. We can have multiple owners. We can have multiple members in the group. However, when you have multiple user identities and you want some automation through which users are automatically assigned to a group based on certain logic, based on certain rule, then you can create a dynamic group. For example, I want all my users who are part of cloud operations to be assigned to a specific group. I want all my users who are from, let's say, Gurgaon and are part of cloud operations to be assigned to a group. These are the logics that you can put. So if I navigate to Entra, let's see a couple of users first. So let's look at these users. Let's say one user, which is Radharani. When I click on the user properties, if I look at the contact information, she's from Delhi. And if I look at her job information, she's part of cloud operations team, right? So she's from Delhi and she's part of cloud operations team. Similarly, if I go to another user, which is, let's say, this Shyam Rana, this user, doesn't have city mentioned here. However, this user, okay, so this user doesn't have department also. Let's move the department. So let's say department is cloud operations for this user also. Cloud operations, okay. And city, let's say Delhi. So I'll save this information. And similarly, I will have another user, Shyama Kumari. This user is from Delhi. I'm saying city is Delhi. And if you look at the job operations, let's put this user also as cloud operations. Okay. So I have 3 users here who are from Delhi. Now, when I say city Delhi, let's understand this is the office location. My company has an office in Delhi. So this is an office location. Now, my HR, what my HR needs, whosoever joins in Delhi and is part of cloud operations team or belongs to cloud operations department should automatically get provisioned in a specific group. That's what one logic that HR needs, so that they don't have to manually add users to group. Probably they don't have access at the group level. That could be a reason also, or they want to automate the functionality, right? So what we will do, I'm saying how it will be defined, because HR may not have access to create group. HR will have access to create user identities for sure. Or you will have some workflow triggered that will fetch user identity information from HRMS system to Entra. Something that we will talk about almost at the end of the training with respect to the workflows. So let's see how the dynamic group will work. So what I will do, I will navigate to group. I'll create a new group. And as I said, there are 2 groups, security group and Microsoft 365 group. I'll create a security group. I'll say demo DYN dynamic group. Do I want to assign Microsoft Entra roles to this group? If you say no, when you click on the group properties, you will not see assign roles options. So you will not be able to assign this group any Microsoft Entra role. You can only assign this group Azure subscription RPAC. If you say yes, then you will be able to assign Microsoft Entra role also to this group. Now, why Microsoft is giving you this option? Because your Entra team is separate and an operations team is separate. So when you create a group which is specifically meant for Entra team, for identity and access management team, which would involve users from identity and access management team, you can basically select this option as no. For other groups that are getting created for operations and any group that is getting created for Entra operations, you can select yes, so that you can assign Entra related roles also to this group. That's the logic. We can assign owners, we can assign members, we can assign roles here also. Okay. Now what I'm doing here, when I'm creating this group, I'm create. So when you assign, understand, see this difference. when you select that, yes, Microsoft Entra roles can be assigned to this group. Now, Microsoft Entra roles are privileged roles. So you will not be able to create a dynamic group. This is for the security. This is done by design that Entra is your identity service. It comes under security, and you will not be able to dynamically add users to a security group, which is meant for Entra. However, if you are creating users, if you're creating group that is going to be hosting users from various operations, departments, and whatnot, except for security, Entra security, then you can create a dynamic group here. So I can create a dynamic group for both users as well as devices. So when I'm using Entra domain service, or when I integrate with on-premises active, the exercise that we did yesterday, if I'm done with that integration, the hybrid identity concept, and if I have devices which are joined to my on-premises domain, then this group I can create a dynamic group, and automatically those devices will fall into this group based on the logic that I will provide. So let's understand the logic for user. So I'll select a dynamic group with membership type as dynamic user. Owner, you already know how to select, so there is nothing new in it. So we'll just leave it. And then we will need to add a dynamic query for the group. So how do we add dynamic query, which is the logic, that on what logic users will join the group. So here's the logic. The logic that you need to remember always is the first thing which is common to all the group is object ID. Object ID basically means the user must exist in Entra first. When user is created in Entra, when it exists in Entra by virtue of creation, by virtue of synchronization, by virtue of invitation. So it says object ID must be not equals, which is null. That's what you need to remember. That's the first logic that is common. Object ID must be not equal to null, which means the user must be exist. And then you can add logic. So I can say if there is a user that is created, invited, or synchronized to Entra, and if that user is from city equals Delhi, so I can put the city. If that user is from city which is equals Delhi, and if that user is part of, here I can select department also because I have selected the department. So department equals cloud operations. So I'm putting that information. If that user is from Delhi, and if that user is part of cloud operations department, those users will join this group automatically. So I can create this logic and save it. So city and department I have put here. With that logic, I will save the group. I will save this query and I will click on create. So when I click on create, the group will be created, and within a couple of minutes, automatically those three users which I have shown you having the same properties will automatically join this group. So I'll refresh my portal for a while.
Raghavir, I had a question here. So the casing that you had given for these values, we'll have to follow the same. Like, see, we are manually entering, right? When we are creating a user, these departments, and also, if the casing changes, for example, if somebody is writing like the
Not case
department,
It's not case
so
sensitive.
it's not case sensitive.
Okay. So I'll go to my group, which is DYN. Where is, okay, I'll search for DYN. So this is my group demo dynamic. Now, if I go to the members, you will see the group has 3 members. So automatically those 3 members join this group. You can pause processing also for a dynamic group. Pause processing basically means that now nobody will join to this group as long as it is paused. So you should not pause it, otherwise users will not automatically join. So now those 3 members, if I want to see the members of the group, I can see the members here. You can see Radha Rani, Shyama Rana, and Shyamappa. Automatically they join, and they are all direct members of the group. And then you see all members also. Now understand the difference between direct members and all members. When you create a group, all the members who will join to that group who satisfies all the conditions in end. So there are two operators that you need to understand here. So when I go to the group properties over here, dynamic membership group, and look at the operator that I'm using is end. End basically means that all the three conditions must be satisfied. I can also use an operator which is or also, and or. Either the user should be from Delhi, I'm saying either the user should be from Delhi or the department should be cloud operations, which means any user who is from Delhi or is working in cloud operations can also join this group. In this case, when the user joins, the user will be part of all members, not direct members, because then the user will not be a direct user because you're using end operator. So we don't typically use, we are using or operator. We don't typically use or operator here. We always use end operator. You don't want to put conditions like that. We always keep it simple. The reason is you don't create identities every other day. You don't have employees joining almost every day. That could be true in some organizations cases, but even in that case, you would have created that logic already. So with that logic, it basically comes as members, which says direct members or all members. However, when you assign a role to a group, when you assign a license to a group, it applies to everyone. So it hardly makes any difference. This is just the option. Direct member and all members. The other logic to this also is I can also add members to this group. Now you can see, okay, so they have removed that capability. So do you see that I don't have an option to add members to this group? Right now over here it says members, but I don't see an option to add members to this group. But if I go to any other group, let's say I go to, I'll close this search and I go to any other group, for example, Contoso group. If I go to this group and if I go to members, I will have an option to add members here. Now, the reason I do not have a option to add members because this group is getting synchronized from on premises. This is not this is not a cloud group. I can show you here. This group is basically synchronizing from on premises. Where is Contoso? This is the group Contoso, and you can see the source is Windows Server AD. So since it's a Windows Server group, it is getting synchronized from on premises. I definitely can't add members to this group from here from Azure portal. However, I'll show you a group which is created in Azure, for example, testing group. Right. If I go to the members of this group, I have an option to add members here. So any group, now if I add members to this member will be, I'm saying you can see this try.com is part of direct member as well as all member, because this is not a dynamic group. It's a normal group. However, in case of a dynamic group, you will not be able to add members. Earlier, there was an option to add members into the dynamic group, and that's the reason it would show you the differentiation between direct members and all members. So direct members would basically means the members which are automatically joining the group, and all members would basically means members that you are manually assigning to the group. So to make it simple or to to alleviate confusion, Microsoft is doing this. They will probably remove this capability. When it says direct member and all members, it would only say members of the group because this is confusing. Make sense? So you can create groups like that. You can change the logic also. Let's say I also want to have one member added to the group. Let's say Farhan. Farhan practice. I just want to see the source. Okay, the source is cloud. So I want this member to be added to the group. I will just see the properties of this group, of this member basically. So let's say I will add some properties to this user. Let's say I will add country or region here. So I will say India. I put India here and save it. Now I'll go to my dynamic group. I go to dynamic group rules and I will add one more condition here. And I would say, now if I add one more condition as or, so see, I'm adding one more condition as or, and I say country, and I select equals. You can select all of these operators. I'm just selecting equal for a moment, just for this understanding. And I will say India and save it. Now tell me whether Farhan will join this group or not. What do you think? With this condition in place, whether Farhan will join the group or not, because Farhan is not part of cloud operations. Farhan is not from Delhi. The
No, he
first
will not be part of this group because he will not satisfy the third condition.
Okay, great. So let's see ourselves whether Farhan is joining this group or not. Once again, I refresh so that you're 100% sure here. See, Farhan is not joining the group. Why Farhan is not joining the group here? You can see because there are three conditions. Farhan's condition, the country condition is at the end. There are two end conditions. So since Farhan is not satisfying the first condition, first two conditions, Farhan will not come here. However, if Farhan satisfies the first condition, first two conditions, then only he will join this group. So we want to keep it very simple, the dynamic concepts, because you will need to do permutation and combination before you arrive at a conclusion that, okay, this logic will work here, and then you will finalize it. Typically, we create dynamic groups for departments so that when somebody joins a specific department, that person is automatically assigned to that group. And by virtue of that group, the person is automatically assigned licenses and capabilities in terms of roles and permissions. That's the logic of dynamic group. Is everyone with me on this?
Raghu, can you explain this direct members, all members again? I'm getting confused on this.
Okay, don't get confused. Soon this will get removed. Microsoft
Okay.
is actually confusing you, but I'll tell you the reason. See, what would happen in a dynamic group, there was an option to add members earlier. You can add members to a dynamic group. Now, when you add members to a dynamic group, then there are two types of members. Members who are assigned as per the group rules, the logic of the group. These are the members who are assigned as per the logic. And then the members who are manually added to the group. They come under all members. That's the logic. However,
So
yeah.
yes. So let's say you have added the logic for this dynamic group, right? So user should be part of cloud operations and all. So when I try to add a member manually here, if he is not satisfying that condition, will he be removed immediately?
No, that's the reason. So that's where it was confusing. So that's the
Yeah.
reason Microsoft has stopped
Okay.
providing this capability. To
Okay.
avoid
Okay.
any confusion, Microsoft has faded this option. Earlier, this option was available.
Yeah, because it won't make sense of writing a logic if we add that. Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
So that's the reason I'm saying that this capability will soon be deprecated because Microsoft has already deprecated add members option. Earlier, we had this option wherein we can manually assign members to a group, to a dynamic group, and we can also have some dynamic rule configured for that group to automatically invite or automatically ingest members. And that was sometimes confusing. So that's where Microsoft decided to remove that capability. And now that they have removed this capability will also be removed. They will only have option which is members, no direct all, because this is also confusing them. Because at any point in time, you will always see direct members as well as all members number same. Then the question is that why do I have this logic? So this logic is coming from the UI, because what happens for each capability, they're not changing the UI. So UI is confusing here. But at the end of the day, as I said, whether you are a direct member of a group, whether you fall in all members of the group, you will inherit all the group policies, group restrictions, and group licensing. I'm saying whatever privileges group has, you will enjoy those privileges. Whatever restrictions group has, you will suffer from those restrictions. That's what membership is all about. Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Rukvir, I do have a query regarding this expression which you mentioned in the dynamic group. Suppose if I want to create a group and I just want to add members who are part of the country, you just mentioned India or another location, any other location, and also they should be part of the department cloud operation. So how can I add the query? You said that if we put or expression, it will not take that condition, right?
Yeah,
So
because see, there are first two end conditions are there. So what
mhm.
happened? Why Farhan was not added? Because Farhan was not satisfying these two conditions. See, first condition he was satisfying, then it moved to the next. Next condition was, is he from Delhi? He's not from Delhi.
Yes.
Next condition,
No.
is he from cloud operations department? Not. That's where it stopped. It did not go to this condition. But if it was and or, after and there is
Mhm.
or condition. So the or condition, if Farhan satisfy the or condition, then Farhan will be added, and then after or there will be another flow that will work. It is like the moment the moment it doesn't satisfy the condition, it stops. So the first condition is common. It doesn't say and or, which means the object has to exist in the group. Now the user exists base. User must exist or object ID must exist. It should not be null. Then city. So Farhan is not from city, and then also Farhan is not from this department. So once these two conditions are not satisfied, it will not go to this. If I want to
Okay.
add Farhan, I would need or in between and.
Mm-hmm.
I put or
Okay.
first and then and afterwards, then Farhan will add to this. That's how it will happen.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
And will, two, if you put two and together, and if none of them the user satisfies, user will not be able to add. So the best practice says that if you have multiple conditions, always put and and or together. And or like this. You can put
Mm-hmm.
and or and. That way Farhan will come. And
Okay.
all
Okay.
will also come. Okay.
Okay.
You can also validate rule here. This is how you can validate the rules. You can see here, add users to validate against this rule. For example, I will add user. I will check whether why Farhan is not coming here. So there is an option. I'll look for Farhan Ahmed and okay, that select button is okay. So I've added Farhan and it says view details. So I will validate Farhan. It says view details. So this is where you see the or this is where you see the error. Right? So it says, see, this condition was satisfied. User object ID, so this was the logic, and or, so this is where the challenge is. There are two ends together. That those are creating the challenge. So two ends should not be together. Make sense?
Yes. Yes. Raghu.
Great. So that's about dynamic rule. Understand the concepts, do some labs, and then practice in your spare time and use permutations and combinations to get good in-depth understanding of that concept. Right? There is a high probability that in your customer environment you don't use this feature. But having knowledge of that feature is equally important because you will not be working with this customer all the time. And when you work with other customer, you cannot tell the other customer that though I am part of Entra, however, I have not explored this capability because my previous project did not have it existing. That statement would not be accepted. So you should have expert knowledge of all that you are currently dealing with and good to have knowledge of all that you are not dealing with for a technology that you are part of. So that's what about the logic. Okay, so that was the lab number 3. Now we will move on. We will do lab number 4. However, there are some statements that you can read, which I basically provided to batch 2. You can see Microsoft Entra provides multiple roles, regular as well as privileged, and for efficient management of applications and resources, like global admin, application admin. Entra admins can also create custom roles. Okay, this thing. Let's understand the custom role part also. So we have custom role option in both Entra as well as Azure. Now, there are times when you have a specific requirement or when you want a specific access to be given to an employee. You want that employee to be an administrator, wherein the employee should be able to create resources, manage the configuration of those resources, but must not be able to delete a resource. And it's a valid requirement. I have seen this requirement in most of the clients. They say my admins should not be able to delete. The delete capability I want to restrict to individuals, to specific people. But all my admins, all my N3, they should be able to provision and manage. Delete should go to team leader or manager because they should be kept in loop, or they are the one who are responsible and accountable for deleting resources. Because if something untoward happens, we can at least hold them accountable. So this is a legitimate requirement. That's one requirement that comes. The other requirement is that I have an SME who happens to be an SME for application, for federation, for other capabilities of Entra. However, I don't have one role that I can assign to that SME. I will need to select multiple roles. So, for example, if I navigate to Entra roles, I see all of these roles here. For example, somebody who is an application administrator, somebody who should be given capability for app registration and enterprise application addition capabilities. At the same time, that person is also your DevOps person, or that at the same time, that person should also needs access to compliance related capabilities, right? So compliance administrator. However, in app registration, the person should only be able to register apps, but should not be able to manage the configuration. Or let's say in compliance, the person should be able to only read, but not manage the compliance. So there could be custom requirements. When there is a custom requirement, you can create a custom role also. Instead of selecting multiple roles and assigning it to one identity, you can basically create a custom role and assign it to appropriate identities. So taking the first example, which I said that sometimes I want to give my employees create and manage capability, but not delete capability. So how will I create a custom role for them? See, if I give them admin role, then by default, they will be able to remove also, delete also, because it contains everything. Create and manage all aspects. And manage also includes deletion. I don't want deletion. I only want create and configuration. So I can create a custom role also. I will click on new custom role. I can provide it a name like demo, custom role. Description if I want to do. If I already have a custom role created, I can clone that role. It will basically show the capabilities which are there in the role. Otherwise, I can start from scratch. Since I don't have a custom role created in the past, I will start from scratch. So I click on next. When I click on next, it shows me all the permissions which are there in Entra. All the permissions which are there for a specific role. All the permissions are there. Now let's say I want somebody to be able to perform create operation. I will search for create and it will show me all create capabilities related to other roles also. For example, create application policies, create all types of applications. Then you have create security groups, create Microsoft 365 app, create service principles, create and manage application provisioning. So this is all create related capabilities. right? Similarly, I can look for manage also. These are all manage related capabilities, which is like a read, update, license, all the manage capabilities. So I can select these capabilities. For example, I want somebody to be able to manage user license, right? They should be able to manage user license and should be able to create also user. So create objects. So over here, I will select that specific option. For example, create service principals, anything. I'm saying you just need to go through this option. So create roles, create groups, all that options are available here with respect to create. So you will select the permissions, whatever you need for that custom role like this by using multiple options. Provision you can select. So this is provision part, that this is what you can provision, read, provisioning, reload, create and manage application, start, restart, and pause application provisioning. You just need to understand the keywords, which is manage, read, write, delete, create, provision. These are the keywords. If you want to see delete, then you will see delete operations also. So I say delete, these are all delete operations, delete application policies, delete service principals and whatnot, right? So if this is your requirement wherein you want some custom capabilities, you can just select, for example, I've selected some create and manage capability. I also want this I also want some capabilities related to delete. For example, delete all type of applications, right? Uh, delete devices from Microsoft Entra ID, delete cross-tenant resources, delete security group and Microsoft 365 groups, excluding role-based assigned groups. So you can see all delete capabilities. Select any of them. After you are done selecting all the capabilities, then you can hit next. You will see those capabilities. I'm saying when I was moving, I forgot to select that cap, so only delete is coming. So you need to select those capabilities like this, and then you can hit create. So that's how you can create a custom role in Microsoft Entra. Similarly, if you want to create a custom role in Azure, you can also do that. You can navigate to Azure subscription, access control, and here you can also create a custom role. So there is an option add custom role. Instead of giving somebody contributor, reader, uh, owner access, or any specific service level access, I can create a custom role also. A custom role, let's say I want to grant somebody virtual machine contributor access. However, that access would allow creation, configuration management, and deletion. And I don't want configuration management part. I only want creation part. The person should be able to create resources, but not manage and delete. So I can also do that from here. I can create a custom role. Now these roles will not be shown in Entra. These roles will be shown here, and Entra roles will not be shown here, or these roles will not be shown there. They are two separate roles. So custom role VM. That's how I can put. Now I have options. I can clone a role if there is an existing role which is there. I can start from scratch or I can start from JSON. Now, clone a role doesn't mean an existing custom role here. Clone a role here basically means an existing RBAC which is there. So I can select an RBAC. These are all RBACs which I have. For example, I want to create some customization in virtual machine contributor. So I'll pick a virtual machine contributor role because this is where I want to do the customization. So I will pick this role, click next, and it will show me all the properties of this role, all the actions that a virtual machine contributor can take. Whichever capability I doesn't want to grant, you see this recycle bin, just click on deleting it. Just click, just read that capability. You don't want delete capability, just delete this capability. You don't want any capability, whatever you want to see here. These are all the actions which are available to a virtual machine contributor person. So you can just delete it like this. So that way it is easy for you to, I'm saying, create a custom role because you just need to look what you don't want to grant. By default, it has everything. Or you can manually, I'm saying, if you understand JSON, you can also put that into JSON. This is how JSON looks like for this role. You can also look it from JSON and delete that specific line item if you don't need it. So that's how you can create a role here. So I have deleted some capabilities that I don't want this and that, whatnot, whatever I have deleted, that will go away. Click next, and then you just click next. It shows you the JSON. I'm saying the final JSON of what you have selected, and then click next, and in the end, hit create. So these are the permissions which are left for this role. So that way you can create a custom role in both Microsoft Entra as well as in Azure Subscription RBAC based on your specific requirements. Now, Microsoft says, or all the cloud service providers says, to reduce or to minimize custom roles. Don't use custom roles. Use the default roles and roles which are provided by OEM. The reason for it is that if you create a custom role, you will manage it yourself. What if some capabilities that you have put into the custom role are deprecated? Those will be stale entries into the custom role. What if some capabilities are introduced by Microsoft, which are not part of your custom role? Then users will not be able to work with that capability. So if you are creating a custom role, you will be managing it yourself. And you may not understand the dynamic nature of cloud. It is very dynamic. So that is where Microsoft and other service providers says reduce custom role as much as possible. Create when explicitly needed, but reduce them also. Don't use custom role for each and every requirement. Use the roles which are by default roles, because you have many roles here, and Microsoft keeps on adding more and more roles as we move along. So if you see roles here, they keep on adding more and more roles. At we speak, they have 603 roles. Last year, there were 200 plus roles. Now they have added almost 400 roles in the last 8-9 months. So they themselves understand that a customer may need multiple customizations, and keeping that in mind, they themselves are creating roles. So they say that use our roles instead of creating a custom. But when it is explicitly needed, go for it. So that's what about custom role in both Entra as well as in Azure subscription. Any question on this, guys? And I've told you the use case for custom role. Typically, organizations create custom role when they want to delete capabilities from their administrators. Because sometimes administrator accounts are compromised, and by virtue of that compromise, they may lose services. They may get services deleted. So to avoid that behavior, they remove delete capability by creating a custom role. So that even if the account is compromised, the services are not at least deleted. Configuration changes can be reverted, but once the service is deleted, you will not be able to, I'm saying, get that service back, because not all services support backup. Right? Virtual network, it doesn't have any backup. Once deleted, it is deleted forever. Storage account and compute has a backup, but then there are other services that doesn't support backup. So that's why we do it. So that's all the custom rule, guys, that you should be aware of. Okay. Assigning someone member access to only create users, as I gave you the example. Lab 1, create a custom role. So I did this lab also. So you can practice it yourself. That's it. So that's what basically we did. So we've completed lab 1 and lab 3. Now we will do lab number 2. Where is lab number 2? Yeah. Now we will do lab number 2, which is working with tenant properties. So that's what we are going to do now. Lab number 2. So when we sign up to Microsoft Azure, when you did sign up the other day, as part of that sign up, you basically got access to Microsoft Entra Tenant and a Microsoft Azure subscription, which is attached or which is part of that tenant. That's what you basically got. However, when you started, there is some basic configuration that needs to be done as a pre-configuration, you would say, before you hand over this environment to production or for operations. Some basic configuration needs to be done, which a global admin can do or an account admin can do. So the first basic configuration is creating or adding a custom domain. Now we all know that our tenant, your respective tenant, basically, it has a custom domain from Microsoft. All of you have this custom domain from Microsoft, this is the custom domain, which is your login credentials with which you logged in. The entire login credentials @ is missing from there, and then .on Microsoft.com. That's the custom domain that Microsoft is. That's the default domain that Microsoft is providing. However, if I use this domain, then my applications or my websites would say like this. This would be my website address. These would be my applications URL if I use custom domain. Now, this URL doesn't look good because by looking at this URL, people will know that this portal is hosted at Microsoft, in Microsoft Azure, because it says on Microsoft.com. It's an Azure domain. So what we typically do as part of initial configuration after signing up with Azure, the first thing that we do is to add our domain, which is known as add custom domain, a domain that we own, a domain that we want to use for all the identities and applications that I would provision in my Azure subscription or in Entra ID. For that, I add a custom domain. So that's what about custom domain is. How do we add a custom domain? We add a custom domain from here. So what we do here, we basically add a custom domain. I'm saying on Entra, on Microsoft Entra in Azure portal, you can directly navigate to custom domain name and you can add a custom domain from here. If you want to do it from Entra Admin Center, see in Entra Admin Center, sometimes you don't get direct options because typically it is part of identity. You don't directly see it here. No worries. You have a search button and search bar. Just type custom domain here and it will directly show you the option. Domain names. Just click here and it will directly take you to this window. Now you can verify the UI is same here also and in Azure portal also. There is no difference in the UI. So you can use UI anywhere. So you basically click on add custom domain. You type your domain here. For example, let's say I'm the admin. I want to add this domain. So I will type the domain name and say add domain. Once I say add domain, Microsoft will say, great. Please verify whether you own this domain or not. Because I just can't allow you to use this domain just because you want to add it. There could be another customer who want to add the same. So you need to verify your ownership on this domain. How do you verify? You don't need to fill a form, put your digital signature on it, or you don't need to do anything. All you need to do, just navigate to your domain registrar, wheresoever you have purchased this domain from, wheresoever you maintain your domain records, just navigate to that place and create this record. We have multiple records. These are internet terminologies. Records basically help you identify a resource over the internet. So create this record, a text record with this information, with this alias pointing to this address, which has a TTL of 3600 seconds, which is equivalent to 1 hour. So create this information at your DNS and come back and hit verify. Create this information, wait for 2-3 minutes so that it can propagate, and then come back and hit verify. Microsoft will quickly check whether this record exists or not. If this record exists, Microsoft will accept that yes, you own the domain, and then Microsoft will show that domain here as status as verified, and you can use that domain as primary domain also. You can make it primary also. Primary basically means that going forward, all identities will use that domain. So that's exactly what domain concept is. This is the first step that you would do after signing up with Azure if you have a domain, or if you are an enterprise, if you are doing, if you migrate to Azure, or if you sign up with Azure for business, then you would do it. So yesterday when I was showing you the hybrid identity lab, when I was using, so yesterday I used Contoso because I had already used cloudexpert.in day before. But day before, when I was using cloudexpert.in domain at on-premises, all my users had the same UPN, which is first name dot last name at cloudexpert.in. And similarly, my users in cloud, they also had the same UPN. So it becomes easy for those users to use the same email address and password for all logins. And any application that I would add to my Entra tenant, that could also use the same domain name. So it helps in maintaining consistency. It helps in maintaining my business brand logo reaching to everywhere instead of using Microsoft. Why would I use Microsoft? Same is the case with storage also. You remember the Azure storage account says blob.core.windows.net. This is Microsoft domain. You can replace it with your own domain, which is your custom domain, if you want to integrate this as part of private endpoint. So this is the concept of custom domain. You want to see where, how to create records, or where exactly to create records. I'll show you. So for example, I've purchased this domain from GoDaddy, that cloudexpert.in, and I want to add that domain. I will come to this website. Here I will see my domains, the one that I own. So I have both the domains cloudexpert.in and cloudexpert.com. Let's say I want to add this custom domain to Microsoft Entra. And when I basically clicked here to add custom domain, Microsoft Entra basically showed me this information. Microsoft Entra said that go ahead and create this record and come back and hit verify. So I will navigate to my domain registrar like this. At the domain registrar, I will click on manage DNS, and here I will make DNS entries. So here I will create an A record. It will show all the records which are there. You can see I already have created one record here, which is this. The last one at the bottom, you can see. Last one at the bottom, it says type is text, name is A, pointing to this address, MS, which says Microsoft value, and TTL is 1 hour. That's it. So you will just create this record here and save this record. And within a couple of minutes, you will be able to verify this domain. And after you verify it, make sure that you make it primary also, so that by default, all groups, all identities will use this domain. That's the concept of it. Any questions that you may have on it? I'll delete this one. So that's the concept of custom domain. Now you probably will not do this activity in operations because this is already done. Or even if you are working with a new engagement, they will probably have done it by themselves already. No customer would ever give you access to their DNS. I'm saying no customer would ever give you access to their DNS services or to their domain registrar credentials. Even if it is needed, they would probably type it on a screen sharing session, but never ever share that access with you. Okay. So now I'm left with my main domains, which are very much available. I cannot delete the default domain. You can see delete button is not available. By default faded. However, any other domain that I have added, I can always delete it. But before I delete this, I will first need to make it secondary. Right now, this is primary, so it can't be deleted. First, I will need to make it. I will need to make other domain as primary. For example, this domain, I will make it primary. After this domain becomes primary, I can go ahead and delete this domain. See, delete button is highlighted now. So I will make it primary. I'm saying it was primary. I will just revert it to the original settings. Okay. So that's the concept of custom domain name. Any question, guys, on this? Let's move on. So that's about domain part. This is part of lab number 2. I'll share lab number 2 first. I'll put the URL in the chat window so that you can see what all we need to do in lab number 2. So I'll open lab number 2. In lab number 2, the first exercise is to create a custom domain. I've explained that part. In the lab, they are adding this domain, which is sales.lab tenant on Microsoft.com. They're just adding the domain. They are not making any DNS changes because it's already added. It is already verified to the lab environment. But I've also shown you how to make DNS entries and come back and verify it. Then some additional capabilities you will see in the lab, which is changing the tenant display name. Right now, what is the display name of my tenant? Default directory. It doesn't look good. It should reflect my business name, right? So I can always change it. Where exactly I can manage my tenant configuration. The lab is all about managing, working with tenant properties, doing some basic configuration or initial configuration before you roll this tenant and subscription out for production. So next is changing the tenant display date. This is the place where you do all the configuration. You just need to navigate to Entra, click on manage, and then at the bottom you see properties. Over here, you can fill in all the information. And so you can provide all the information. First information, the name of the tenant. Right now it says default directory. Doesn't look good. I can put my company name here. Now it looks good because when I invite users to my tenant, when I configure applications, they would reflect my directory. When users would click on it, they would say default directory. Doesn't look good. So I can change my tenant name here. My country or region is decided. I cannot change it because when I signed up to Azure, I provided this information. This can't be changed. My data location is Asia data center. All my data, whether personal, whether payment information that I have shared with Azure as part of this relationship, it is kept in Asia data center. So it is, when I say Asia, does that mean Singapore? Does that mean Malaysia? Does that mean Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan? They all are my neighboring countries and they all fall in Asia. No, it doesn't mean that. This information is misleading. India means India. Data location is in India. It cannot happen that Microsoft will store my data in Singapore. If Microsoft does that, then similar to TikTok and PUBG, Microsoft will be out of India. The government will kick them out. So this is misleading. In reality, my data is in India, and in India, they have two functioning data centers, one in Pune, one in Chennai, wheresoever my data is kept in those data centers. It is in India. Okay, notification, all notifications that I will receive in English, that's what I've selected. Since I've selected India, since my country is India, they also know that Hindi is next most popular spoken language in India. So they're giving me Hindi option also. Tenant ID. If you ever need your tenant ID, you will find it here under tenant properties. So that's your tenant ID. That's unique to you. Two customers cannot have the same tenant ID. Now I can put my technical contact. So this is where you can put certain information here. So by default, the account that you sign up with. So I sign up with this email account, which is outlook.com. That becomes my technical contact. However, in a corporate environment, in a production environment, typically signing up to a service is done by alliance team. You have global alliance team in big companies whose job is to do alliance with various third-party solutions providers, negotiate rates with them, and then finally roll out the service in the environment. So they are the one who will initially create this alliance or relationship. So it will contain their address, but now that they have handed it over to you for management and maintenance, you would want to add your email address or a team's distribution list DL for contact. So here you can put your email address. Similarly, most of the companies, when they are global, they have global privacy team. They have global data, protection leader, data protection leader or data privacy professionals, DPD. So you can put the global privacy contact information here. Then comes privacy statement. When somebody sign into your tenant, when somebody access your application, you can put the URL here. User will be forwarded to that URL. I would say that session will be forwarded to the URL where user will first the privacy statement, acknowledge it, and then come back and use your application so that there is no confusion at the end of the day. So that's what privacy statement URL is. The most important thing, which is this. If you remember, the other day I told you that even if you make a member user global admin and owner on Azure, global admin on Entra, and owner on Azure, even though that person doesn't enjoy the similar privileges that an account admin enjoys, somebody who signed up to Azure, because of this setting. It says Entra admin. This is the user with which I'm logged in right now, which is my global admin user. This happens to be a member user in my tenant. Entra admin username can manage access to all Azure subscriptions and management groups in this tenant. It says no. Because of this setting, my access is not similar to the access that this person enjoys. And if I want my access at par with this person, this ID, because this is where we signed up with, we just need to click yes. Now you will have the same level of access. You will be also able to create additional tenants. You will be able to manage the tenant, manage the subscriptions and management group also. So that is the reason I always keep it low, because if this account is compromised, at least I will be protected. And this account cannot compromise because this account is configured with MFA. This, if somebody tries to sign into this account, it will send a code to another email address. And they cannot hack two email addresses at the same time. And if they do, then they can do anything. Okay, security defaults. That's what I was talking about. By default, Microsoft Entra is an identity and access management service that falls in security category will provide you some default security configuration. Even though you have not configured anything, there will be some default configuration. Those are known as security defaults. And those default security configuration will protect your account from unauthorized access, from data leakage, and other security misconfigurations, which is known as security default. Security default is by default enabled in all Entra tenants when you sign up to Entra or sign up to Azure. However, when you want to manage security yourself by configuring any of the service that falls under security tab here, any of these services that you see here, when you want to configure these services yourself, which is conditional access or any other security services, then Microsoft security defaults must be disabled because you are taking ownership and you are configuring advanced capabilities. If you don't use, I'm saying, let's say you decide to go with free license, and in free license, none of these capabilities are available. At least security defaults will protect your account. That's the concept of security default. So if I want to configure any of these capabilities, I will need to delete. I will need to disable it. For example, if I click on conditional access, the first thing that it will ask me, so let's say I try to create a policy in conditional access. I hit new policy. It will give me a prompt and say, hey, you know what? Security defaults are enabled. Can you go and delete it? Sorry, disable it and come back to the screen and create a conditional access policy. Look at the bottom, it says, it looks like you are about to manage your organization's security configuration. So Microsoft says, hey, it seems that now you want to handle security yourself. You want to take over this responsibility. Great. That's great. However, let's go ahead and disable my security defaults. The one that I'm providing you by default, please disable it and you are on your own. Manage security yourself. Now that you have got P1, P2 license, manage it. So you will find this option. That's what security default is. Where do you go and disable security defaults? Similarly, go to properties and at the bottom, you will see security default option that can be disabled. You can click on manage security defaults and you can disable it. And when you disable it, it basically asks the reason for disabling. So you can always say that my organization is planning to use conditional access. And it also says once you disable security default, your organization will not be protected until you create conditional access policies to protect your identities. So it says that if you are disabling it, make sure you build your security configuration. It should not happen that you disable it today and probably take a week to decide what you want to configure. You will remain unprotected for that 1 week. That's what security default is all about. So I'll cancel it because right now I'm not configuring any security configuration. So I'll just continue with security default. So that's the concept of security default. Now, if you go back to your lab, you will see all of these scenarios. First, creating a custom domain. Second, changing the tenant display name. Task 2, review country, region, and other values associated with your tenant, which is this. Then finding the tenant ID, you will find it here. Then setting your privacy information. They are setting the privacy information, the URL, right? Then this feature. After that, this is how the privacy information shows. So when somebody signs in, they basically see this information on the sign-in page. Microsoft picks it up from the privacy URL. And then in the end, check your privacy statement. That's it. They don't talk about security default, but that is very important for you need to understand. That's the reason I explained it. So that's all about lab 2. I'm saying there is absolutely nothing that you need to configure, but you should be aware of all of this. You should capture this information and you should put this information in terms of technical context, global privacy context, and privacy statement URL. I'm open to questions if you have any. Is everyone on the same page with security default, creating custom domain name, putting in place appropriate information with respect to technical context, privacy URL, making a note of tenant ID or the data residency and localization aspects? Yes, no, maybe? Right. So we are done with lab number 1, 2, and 3. We'll move on to lab number 4. Before we do that, let's take a break for 10 minutes. We will resume at 11:10, and then we move on to the lab number 4, which is configure external collaboration settings, a very important lab that will have some reference in the subsequent labs also. Let's get started. So lab number 4 is basically on configuring external collaboration settings. When I say external collaboration, let me share the lab first with you. Okay. So when I say external collaboration, it basically means that when you are in business, you would need support from third parties, from vendors, from partners to enable your business requirements. And as part of that requirement, as part of that support, you will let them access your tenant, applications which are registered in your tenant, applications and workloads which are basically part of your tenant. So there are two ways to allow them to access your tenant. First is create their member account, right? So the first option that you basically use, signing license. Yeah, the first option that you basically use is to, so in this, I'm saying when you want for external collaboration, the first option that you have is create a member user for third party vendors, contractors, etc. That's first option. Create a member user for third party vendors, contractors, followed by assigning them appropriate access to Entra roles and or Azure subscription RBAC. That's the first option that you have. However, what happens in some organizations, especially multinational organizations, they are governed by regional as well as global policies, which sometimes doesn't allow you to create contractor accounts or vendor accounts for a temporary period. They don't allow this behavior. What they say that if you need to grant them temporary access to somebody to your environment, you can probably find another avenues, but they would not allow you to create a member account. First, when you create a member user for anyone, it has to go through a long process, long approval workflow, and it has to be reported into the audit also. When the audit happens, the auditor looks for that information. And it has directly related to compliances and taxes also, uh, because when there is an employee, when there is an account for an employee created, you will also need to provide certain statutory benefits which are needed for employees. So to avoid this behavior, what we do, we have another option, which is we can invite, I'm saying we can invite third party vendors, contractors, etc. We can invite them as guest users. That's the another option that you have. You can invite them as guest user. They join your directory, your tenant as guest user, and then you can provide them appropriate access to your environment. That's another option. However, when they join your environment as guest user, the question is the identity. You also need to federate with guest users, federate a guest users identity provider for trusting and allowing them access to your environment. That's very important. Let's say I invite somebody as a guest user and that person has Gmail ID. That person has an account with Facebook. That person has their own Microsoft account, their own domain, and with that domain, they have an account. So that could be n number of possibilities. So when I invite a guest user, and so this is part of invite itself. So when you invite a guest user, you need to make sure that you basically create a trust between your Entra tenant with their tenant, so that when that user signs in, Entra will basically approach the tenant of that user or the identity provider of that user with the credentials to get verification, to get authentication. So that's what guest user concept is. That's exactly what you will configure in this lab. Now, this lab is basically, so I'll share the lab now with you. So this lab basically talks about configurations, that what configurations you need to do basically to enable that functionality. That's what this lab is all about. I've already shared the lab in the chat with you. So this is what this lab is all about. In this lab, you will basically define permissions for your, for your admins, whether they can invite guest users. See, invite an external user to your tenant and granting them access to your tenant roles as well as subscription RBAC is a risky. It is a risk. I'm saying it also involves risk. What if, what if some employee invites an external person and shares some data with them? So it may lead to data leak. It may lead to policy violation. It may result in damage to your business also. So you need to be 100% sure when you invite somebody. And Entra admins, this is also the configuration that you basically do as part of your initial configuration. The Entra admin will basically decide who will have the capability to invite users. That's the first thing. Second, when external users are invited, will they be allowed to, will they be given Entra roles, Azure subscription, RBACs? If yes, then at what level they will be given? Will they be given privileged roles? Will they be given restrictive access? That's the another configuration that you decide. The third, as an admin, you decide what all identity providers you are ready to federate with. The user may have, the user may be an Instagram user may be using some other identity provider. So are you ready to federate with them? That's the third decision that you will take. And when you are ready, then you will do the federation also. So these are some of the decisions that as an admin you will take, and that's exactly what is configured in this lab. So you can see in this lab, it doesn't take much time. It says allowing guest users to be invited to your organizations, right? So this is where you basically allow guest users to be invited to your organizations. Where exactly you find this setting? You can navigate to Entra Admin Center. Under Entra Admin Center, you see this user setting. Over here, you will see all the configurations. Similarly, if you navigate to Azure portal, in Azure portal also, if you navigate to users, under manage, it says user settings. You see the same option here. So the view remains the same, whether you do it from Entra, whether you do it from here, the view remains the same. So let's do it from Entra Admin Center. So what are my options here? The first option is default user role permission, which is user can register applications. So I can, by default, it is available. I can say no. I can drag it to the left, and then no user will be able to register application. Only administrators will be allowed, which is global admin, right? So this is by default enabled. Let's keep it enabled. Then it says restrict non-admin users from creating tenants. Non-admin users will be restricted to create tenants. This is by default no, which means you're not restricting. But then non-admin users can also not create tenants. That's the another irony. Users can create security groups. The security group that we were just looking at, dynamic group or M365 group, can users create it or not? Yes. You can click on no, then only admin can create. So these are the settings. Then guest user access, very important, which is external collaboration. So for external collaboration, guest user access restrictions. So as an admin, you're basically deciding that guest users have the same access as member. Now, probably in some organizations don't allow this behavior. They would not allow a guest user to have global admin access, which a member user may have. So guest users should not be same as member. Guest users having limited access to properties and membership of directory objects. Guest user is restricted to properties and membership of their own directory objects, most restrictive. So in most of the organizations, we go with the second radio button, the mid-level of restrictions, when guest user will be provided access. However, their access will be limited to certain aspects. So that's what we do. Next, administration center, which is restrict access to Microsoft Entra Admin Center. This is a new capability which they have added with the Entra Admin Center. So Do you want to restrict guest users to not access this portal? Right now it says no. Microsoft wants them to also use it so that they can go back to their business and say, hey, you know what? We have seen a great UI of a tool which really had all the options that we can also leverage in our company. So that's the reason Microsoft is not doing it. But I would say yes. I would never ever allow a guest user to manage Entra roles, to manage Entra admin center. I would rather hire that person as an employee. Why would I allow contractors that manages security for me? I don't find a reason for it. So Microsoft has actually enabled this capability, but I'm turning it off. I'm saying, yes, I want to restrict access to Microsoft Entra Admin Center for guest users. They are my guest users. They are there for a specific purpose for a temporary period. I don't want to allow. It differs from organization to organization, guys. LinkedIn account connections. This is another configuration. Allow users to connect their work or school account with LinkedIn. So do you want to allow users to connect their work or school account with LinkedIn? That is okay. Now, since Microsoft owns LinkedIn, so they are allowing this option. Then keep users signed in. So by default, it shows keep users signed in. I'm saying when you sign in, there's an option which says keep signed in. So that option is showing. Then comes external user once again. But before we go to external users, first see user features. So manage user features here. It says users can preview features of my apps. None, selected, all. So when you grant a user an access to an application, and if there are capabilities which are in preview, do you want those preview capabilities to be shown to the users? By default, it says none. If you say selected, yes, you will need to select to whom you want to show it. And if you say all, then it will be shown to everyone. So there is absolutely no risk in showing preview capabilities. I don't find a risk, but this is the setting that you need to be aware of. I'll discard it. Now let's come to the previous page, which is the important setting here, which is manage external collaboration setting. Along with the lab, if there is any additional setting that I feel you should be aware of, I'm actually explaining that as well. So you will see some information that was already there in the previous tab. For example, these three checkboxes. It's already there here. We have already selected, but you also see them here. And since you've selected there, you will also, because I have selected, but I have not yet saved that setting. So that's the reason I've not yet saved it. That's the reason when I go to the manage external collaborations, it is still coming to default. So guest users, same access? No, never. Then guest invite settings. Who can invite? Anyone in the organization can invite. Member users and guests and users assigned to specific admin roles can invite. Only users assigned to specific admin roles can invite. No one in the organization can invite guest users, including admins. So for some of the customers that I work with, they have a strict no policy for guest users. So they have this radio button checked. Some of the customers have this radio button checked because they only give this capability to admin users. And some customers have this button also checked, which is anyone can invite anyone, which is a most, I would say, inclusive environment. But this is a risk to security. So I would rather say that you can choose the remaining two. Don't choose the one, don't choose the last one, because the last one is most restrictive. The collaboration is very important in today's age. You just can't work with yourself, with your people all the time, and not leverage the skills and experience of others who are outside of your domain. So second and third option, you can pick and choose. Then enable guest self-service sign up via user flows. This is very important. When guest is signing in, the user flow will get triggered for signing in, wherein the guest, wherein the Microsoft Entra, when receiving the login credential from guest, will basically approach the identity provider of the guest user validating whether the credentials are correct. Then it will come back after it gets the validation. It would either say access username or password is incorrect, or it would provide the next field. So that is very important to enable. It says you means that you enable self-service sign up for a guest via user flows associated with applications in your directory. No means that application cannot be enabled for self-service sign up. So we are enabling it so that I can also have integration done wherein I can enable auto provisioning of users. External user leave settings. Now, external users allow external users to remove themselves from your organization recommended. So external users can remove themselves from your organization. Understand this setting. It says yes means that the end user can leave the organization without approval from admin, which means they can leave themselves. So they are not removing their object ID. It's not that a guest user is guest user having access to Microsoft Entra is moving to Microsoft Entra user blade and then deleting himself or herself. No, it basically means that when somebody wants to leave, it doesn't require any workflow to be triggered. They can directly leave. They don't need any permissions. That's what it is. Then collaboration restrictions, very important that you need to understand here, because majority of the leakage that happens in the environment is because of this setting, misconfiguration of these settings. So either you have this setting, which is nobody can invite guest users, which means you have just closed the door of networking of collaboration. So don't just close the door, but be careful with what settings you are configuring. For example, it says allow invitation to be sent to any domain, most inclusive. You can send invitation to any domain, to any user with any identity service provider. Deny invitation to the specific domains. Specific domains I can deny admission. I can select and I can put the target domain here that I don't want to be invited. Allow invitation only to the specific domain, most restrictive. I can type the domain here. So I can type the domain like gmail.com, Hotmail, Outlook, wheresoever I want to allow invitation. So this setting is important. Now, in most of the organizations, they will not have this setting enabled because this setting may get compromised. And with this, an unwanted user, illegitimate user can also be invited. So they always have this, wherein they decide that who they want to allow. They put the domain name here, and only those users with that domain name can be invited. So they select the target and they will put the information here. So these are my settings with respect to external collaboration, which is very important for large organizations because you can't work in silos. You need to collaborate with outsiders to share your knowledge and experience and gain benefited from there also. Is everyone with me on these settings, the external collaboration part? Any question, guys, on this? That's exactly what you're doing in lab 4. If you look at the lab 4, that's exactly what you're doing. You're allowing guest users to be invited, and it says manage external user collaboration, says enable guest user self-service sign up via user flows. So you're saving this setting, which is you're allowing the self-service sign up. In second task, you are basically allowing the email one-time passcode for external identity providers so that they can use it. Then in the third task, you are selecting guest user access is restrictive to properties and membership of their own directory, most restrictive. I would say these are the actions based on what you need, you can select. For each option, they are explaining they're giving the meaning. I'm saying they're explaining that what it basically means and collaboration restrictions. So that's exactly what this lab is all about, wherein it is more about understanding what are my administrative settings set as admin, because these kind of settings are restricted to global admins or security admins. They are the one who are responsible to decide the behavior of these settings whether you want to allow, whether you want to give them most inclusive access, or you want to give them most restrictive access, or you want to be flexible, uh, you want to fall somewhere in between. That's your decision. So that's about the lab 4. In the exam, you will have question here. Question, one or two questions comes from this lab, in the exam from this lab only. That how can we, what all settings are possible. So the question will be like, there will be a question that we want to allow a guest user or an organization has this requirement. It's a scenario-based question. And then you will see these options in the questions. And based on the question requirement, you will need to pick and choose the option. That's how the question in the exam comes. So that's your lab. You can go through these options yourself in your lab environment and see how they are working.
Raghu, I have one question.
Yeah.
I understand when we invite users from a domain which is federated with our Entra ID, but what about, let's say, my domain is not federated with Gmail and I have invited a user who is using gmail.com. So at the time he access my application, so the authentication will be passed through to the Gmail server, or how I can control the authentication?
There are two options here. If you want to allow access once in a while, I would say you don't want to allow permanent access to that user, you can use this option, which is email. You see that on the top here, because earlier this option used to exist here. Now they are moving it to they are basically moving it to other flow, which is all identity provider. So when you click here, you see this option, which is email one-time passcode. If that user signs in once in a while, you can do email one-time passcode. But if that user signs in permanently, then definitely you need to go with the federation. You will need to federate with Gmail. For example, in my account, I'm federated with Google. So all Google users can sign into my account. I have already done this federation. You probably will not see this option in your account when you click on it there.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm federated with Google, which means I have added Google. I'm say, because I have an account with Google, I'm say, since I also deliver trainings on Google Cloud, by virtue of that relationship, I maintain a Google Workspace account. And on Google Workspace account, the same domain is federated, cloudexpert.in. So I can with the help of that federation, I can invite any Google user to use I can invite any Google user to this Entra tenant. So that federation is already completed here. Similarly, you can federate with Facebook. You can federate with any application. You can also federate with custom applications here using SAML or WS federation. So this is something that we will discuss when I talk about the federation or when I talk about single sign-on use cases. And I'll show you a use case wherein how my identities in Microsoft Entra can can sign into Amazon and GCP cloud, can do single sign-on SSO to Amazon and GCP cloud with SAML 2.4 without providing any credentials. I'm saying the authentication part and the authorization part from the cloud part, from the cloud console also. So that's what I will show you probably next week when we reach to that topic. But right now, to answer your question, yes, if it's a temporary access once in a while, go with one-time passcode. And if it's regular behavior of the user and there is not one user, there are multiple users, then go with the federation because you don't want to do email, passcode all the time. Right?
Yeah. Thanks, Raghu.
Raghuveer, I have one question here. We are inviting external users into Entra, but are there any options for them to access the on-premises objects or resources?
On-premises objects or resources.
Yes.
See, your on-premises objects and resources are already synchronized using Entra Sync Connect to Entra. So they are already visible in Entra now. So they can directly access them from Entra. But if you say that I don't have hybrid identity use case here, wherein my on-premises is separate, Entra is separate, then the answer is you will need to figure out a solution for on-premises, which is nothing but federation or
Okay.
single SAML 2.0.
All right.
Right? Okay. However, in on-premises, you can use Microsoft Identity Manager. It's a great solution wherein you can create contractor accounts for guest users in your directory and you can manage it well. See, federation is a privilege that organizations leverage for temporary period. But if it is a permanent behavior, for example, Microsoft itself doesn't use federation. Microsoft, as I told you, any employee of Microsoft whose email address starts with V dash, which is vendor dash, it's not via federation. Microsoft has actually created in their Active Directory tenant in their on-premises directory using Microsoft Identity Manager solution, their credentials. So Microsoft themselves are not using federation because if it uses federation, imagine Microsoft has more than 1,000 service providers across the globe working for them. Can you manage 1,000 federations? That's too much. So what they do, they use identity management MIM solution using Microsoft Identity Manager. They have basically created contractor accounts in their Active Directory itself with separate, I'm saying with separate set of permissions, which is so that it is so that they are separated from their full-time employees. So if you have a long-term requirement to work with a vendor or a partner, it's a long-term contract and it's a permanent and it's a regular use, regular access from their employees, then I would rather suggest you to, you know, not look into the federation, look for another solution of creating their contractor role in your directory. That could be the right approach because federation has its own challenges. The challenge with federation is what if the user account is compromised? What if that identity is compromised? Federation will not know whether the identity is compromised because federation will not be able to validate that part. So let's say I am a Gmail user, my identity is compromised. Now somebody can use federation to sign into your tenant. Nobody will know that, right? However, if I don't use federation, and if I'm using MIM process, which is Microsoft Identity Manager, where my account is created in your tenant, then in your tenant, you can put certain restrictions. Restrictions in terms of where that user access is coming from, probably the location, public IP. In federation, you will not be able to do that. Federation doesn't allow you to put restrictions based on location, based on IPs, but your internal integration can allow you to do that. I say, if you think it from Microsoft Entra perspective, if you create a member user for your vendors, then you can put restrictions in terms of conditional access based on location, based on IP address, as well as you can also configure user entity and behavior analytics capability (UEBA), which will then further create behavior pattern of those users. And whenever it finds a deviation from those patterns, it can quickly alert you that it's a risky login, it's a risky sign in or risky behavior, which you will not be able to do for guest users because guest users will always have limited privileges. So for a long-term requirement, you should always go with a permanent solution. Federation is more of a temporary solution that I personally feel. And that's what I actually recommend to my customers, that don't just depend on these federated solutions because they also have a single point of failure. Go with a permanent solution. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Let's move on. So this is on the federation, this is on the collaboration, which is very important aspect of Entra tenant configuration, which you might not have seen in your current roles and responsibilities because you already have it configured by the customer. But now that you are going through this training, I'm making sure that anything that you have not done is what I'm covering. Anything that you typically do on day-to-day basis, I can probably touch base and move on because you already have good knowledge there. But these are the some configurations that you have not touched, you have not come across. So this training will help you to identify these configurations also. So tomorrow, if you come across similar scenarios, you would know where to go and what to configure. and what would be the best practices, for that configuration. That's the objective of it. Okay. So that's
Raghuveer, just a query regarding this external identities. Will it going to cover the B2B and B2C configuration as well?
no, that's outside of the context.
Okay.
I can separate separate documentation with you, or if you have specific query, we can discuss it offline. But in this training, it is outside of the scope of the training.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Yeah.
Great. Let's move on. So this is about the lab number 4, wherein you will configure external collaboration settings. We will come back to this lab probably next week, when we will see that how do we collaborate with external identity providers. And since I have access to AWS and GCP, I will show you that collaboration, because for any collaboration that you want to do, you need to have maintained a relationship with that by virtue of subscription or licensing. Then only you can do the collaboration. But if you maintain a license for any third-party application and you want to see how do we collaborate, how do we configure SSO with that application using SAML, I will show you the process, and then we can go through it. So I will talk about the entire configuration options. All you need to do, just capture basic information from them, put it in your configuration, and share your information with them that they will put it in their UI, and then you can do the validation or handshake. Okay, so that's about lab number 4. We'll move on to the next lab or the next topic. Just give me 1 minute. I forgot to sign out from GoDaddy actually. All right. Lab number 5. So lab number 5 is in, is in continuation with lab number 4, which is add a guest user to the directory. You've just configured the guest user settings basically. So now you will test it yourself, and this you will test it with one-time passcode capability. Instead of doing the federation, you will test it with one-time passcode here. Should I share lab number 5 with you? Let's understand what we are going to do in this lab, and then you will need to do this lab yourself. I'll just quickly explain what is there in the lab. So in this lab, you are basically so you basically navigate to Entra, then you click on identities, all users, new user, same, and then you will invite user. Now, when you invite user, obviously in the lab, they are inviting, they're inviting a user which they've already configured in the backend, but you go ahead and invite a Gmail user. So invite a Gmail user and provide some basic information in terms of put the user's email address, and if you want to configure other properties like department, city, address, and whatnot, configure all of it, hit review plus invite, and invite the user. After you invite the user will be automatically added to the directory as a guest. However, unless that user invitation, you will not be able to configure any settings, or any settings that you configure for that user will not be applicable unless that user accepts it. So after you invite that user, you will need to navigate to the mailbox of that user, and then you will need to copy, and you will need to accept the invitation by either clicking on accept invitation button, or by clicking on the URL which is there, but by copying that URL and putting into a browser window. Whichever option you want to do, you can do it. And then you will need to see whether that user is able to sign into your tenant by using a one-time passcode capability. That's one thing that you need to do. Second, then you will need to understand how do we invite guest users in bulk. We've seen how do we invite or create bulk users. Now we will see bulk invite option also, which is the same case wherein you will be given a spreadsheet, wherein in the spreadsheet you will just need to type the user email address. You can try this option also, bulk invite users, by downloading the spreadsheet and then uploading it after filling in the information. And once you do it, you will start to see those users mentioned, and you will always see the users type mentioned as guest. So that's what you're doing. If you want to know how to invite guest users via PowerShell, for that you need Microsoft Graph module, and you can follow this information. Very simple. You just need to type invite user email address and invite redirect. So that's what you need to do. So simple. This lab you need to do. It is for 20 minutes, but it hardly takes 10 to 15 minutes to complete. So I want one person to share the screen who will do this lab so that I can guide what needs to be done. So rest of you, please follow the instructions which are there in the lab. And also, any input that I provide to Anusha while she does it. I can see your screen. Please go ahead and do this. I'm just looking at it.
I can provide my Gmail itself, right?
Yep, obviously, because
Okay.
you will be able to accept the invitation. If you provide somebody else's, then you will have a dependency. So this is the similar when you invite an external user or when you create a user, you will notice that the UI is similar. You will need all the information for the user. They don't know whether you are doing it for testing, whether you're doing it in a training, in a training class, or it is a production requirement that you are doing. So Microsoft is giving UI which you can fill in. Okay, so you don't need to fill in all the information since we are just doing it testing here.
Okay.
Yeah. Always remember to provide usage location. Usage location is important for that user to access the service. If you don't provide usage location, user will not be able to access most of the capabilities. Add role and group, leave it. You don't need to provide it.
Okay.
However, if you want to test your dynamic group, this is the opportunity. You can, okay, so you've already sent the invitation. That's okay. So invitation has gone, right? It's in progress.
It's in progress.
That's okay. How will you accept the invite? You may not be able to access Gmail on this laptop.
From my mobile phone itself.
Okay. Then nobody will be able to see the flow.
Okay.
Okay. No worries. People can do it on their respective systems. But before you do this, did you have enable one-time password option? Because you don't have, I'm saying in your account, you don't have integration with Google. So that user will not be able to sign into your tab if you've not enabled one-time password.
Oh, okay.
So go back and enable one-time password. Go back to user settings. Under manage, manage. You have not managed user settings. And then on the top, you see that exclamation, click there. First of all, scroll it down. Have you enabled user workflow? That is very important. User workflows. Manage external collaboration. Yeah, now user workflow. Scroll it down. That user workflow is enabled. No, it's not enabled. Enable that workflow. Otherwise, your user will not be. That says enable guest self-service sign up via user workflow.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
This setting.
All others are fine, but
all others.
Allow invitation to.
Okay. As long as you're not providing users any access, you are with the. By default, it goes with most exclusive, which means your guest users can be a global admin and they can also be an owner on Azure.
Okay.
Okay, now go back to directory. No, go back to user settings once again. User settings. Okay. Now click on that collaboration once again. Manage external collaboration. Now on the top, you see email one-time passcode has been moved to all identity providers. Yep. Okay, it's configured.
Google.
We're good. So you will not be able to configure it. You will need that client ID and client secret. You don't have that for Google. So one-time
Okay.
password configured, which means from your Gmail ID, you will be able to sign into this tab using one.
Okay, got it. So I have to create a new user, right?
No, the same user.
Same. Okay. Let
Because
me
your
check the mail.
user is not logged in yet.
Okay.
So you can try it from your mobile phone.
I have accepted the invitation.
It will basically trigger a
Yes.
workflow that will basically generate a one-time passcode now.
Okay.
That itself will come in your Gmail account from Microsoft. That is to confirm that you maintain that user account. I'm saying, see, anybody can get the link, right? So I'm saying it's not a secure method, but at least something is better than nothing when you don't have federation configured. Did you receive one-time passcode?
It's loading now. Permission requested. Okay.
Yeah. So Entra ID is requesting permissions, or the default, or your directory is requesting permissions from the user so that it can read some basic configuration. You need to provide those permissions. Otherwise, that flow will, corrupt it. I'm saying it will not proceed further if you don't give permissions.
Okay. Yes. It right now logged into myapplication.microsoft.com.
So you logged in. So
Yes.
now you will not see anything because you have not assigned any role. You've not assigned
Right.
any or RBAC to this user. That's the reason user is not able to see anything. But once you assign any RBAC or role to this user will actually be able to use it. Right? In fact, if you assign any application to this user will see those applications in myapps.microsoft.com. Okay.
Okay.
That's the process. That's all about this lab. When you invite a guest user and then you basically use that guest user account to accept the invitation, follow the workflow and see whether you are getting routed to myapps.microsoft.com or not. That's all about this lab, guys. So let's complete this lab. It's very simple lab. All right. We will need to do 2 more labs before we complete the session for today. All right. So our next lab is, so we have done, so these labs are actually related to one another. That will also help you understand the OAuth configuration. So this is lab number 5, wherein you have added guest user to the directory. And this time you are making this guest user sign in with a one-time password. But you cannot continue with this approach when you have multiple users. You would probably want to federate with with Google, so that you can have multiple users signing in and they do not require one-time passcode, and you can probably have more control on the behavior. You can get the logs and other information. So for that, we have next lab, which is lab number 6. So this is completed. The lab number 6 is add a federated identity provider. I'll share lab number 6 with you. However, lab number 6 requires a Google account. So I will just see if I can get you a Google account. So we will probably do that lab tomorrow, not today. I will need to arrange a Google account for you, a Google Cloud account. Basically, it requires a cloud account for this lab that you don't have. I have a cloud account. I just need to provision your access to that cloud account. So we will probably do that today. And so tomorrow, once I'm done that, we'll move on to the next lab, which is lab number 7. So I'll say this is pending. Let's do the next lab. Which is enable multi-factor authentication. Let's understand multi-factor authentication service and the options. How do we enable multi-factor authentication, or what all capabilities are available as an admin? I'll share the lab URL with you. So lab number 7, I'm saying this is lab number 8 actually. Lab number 7 is optional, which is more on the hybrid identity configuration that we have already completed. We have actually completed more than what is there in lab number 7. It only provides the configuration, but we have done testing for pass-through authentication, write back, and other features. So we are on lab number 8, which is enable multi-factor authentication. Now, what are we doing in this lab? We are basically configuring MFA. But before we configure MFA, I will also tell you. So for this lab, now this is where, now from this lab onwards, you will need P2 license. So if you have not taken P2 license, now this is where you will get a roadblock. So first, I will explain the process without P2, and then we will see that what additional capability P2 brings on the table when it comes to the multi-factor authentication. So this is what the lab is all about. But before we start with this lab, before we do any of this, let's talk about multi-factor authentication. What is multi-factor authentication? Why do we need it? It's I'm saying the lab looks lengthy, but it is not actually. It's very simple lab. But let's just understand the MFA concept. So multi-factor authentication in, I would not say in Azure, in Entra ID. So when it comes to multi-factor authentication, first understand what is multi-factor authentication, why do we need it, why multi-factor authentication is needed, and in what scenarios we can actually configure multi-factor authentication for our users. So first of all, any of the participants, if you would like to talk about what is multi-factor authentication and why do we need it, why it is so necessary today. I'm all ears now. Why do we need it?
Multi-factor is more for the secure signing purpose, where other than we are using a simple username or password, we can configure multiple other factors like we can use phone number, we can use the authenticator app. So there are primary and secondary multi-factor methods are there, which will provide more security to our signing process.
Okay, so you're saying that we do it for additional security.
Yes.
The signing process in itself is a secure process because it involves supplying credentials, credentials which are known to you only. So it is a safe process in itself. But with credential theft, with key logging solutions, which are there, you have key loggers. When you use public hotspot, when you use systems at public places like airports, cinema halls, or railway stations, or any public kiosk, when you use, they may have a keylogger solution deployed, keylogger software installed, and that keylogger can quickly capture the keystrokes, which would be able to capture. So it does the screen capturing as well as keystrokes capturing. So it would know that you actually put these keystrokes on that screen. So it can easily capture your username and password. This is just one example that where exactly there is a risk to security when it comes to supplying credentials. Definitely, they are not plain credentials. They are encrypted. Even the website is encrypted. When you type the credentials, they are not shown. They are in encrypted format. However, if there's a keylogger software, it can capture it. But imagine the same scenario that there is a keylogger software on the system which has captured the keystrokes. And from that, it has identified the login, the login credentials as well as password. With the help of an additional factor authentication, system admins or application admins can be 100% sure that their system and applications are not compromised. So when you have enabled additional factor authentication, which is probably a one-time passcode that you receive on the email, you also have restore codes available. For example, Google provides you up to 10 recovery codes. You can keep them safe with yourself. If you don't have your mobile phone with you for Authenticator app, for one-time passcode, or for push notification, you can use recovery codes also. So those recovery codes are also a form of multi-factor authentication. This is known as second factor authentication, basically, and also multi-factor authentication. So this is there to provide an additional layer of security to your system, to your network, to your application. That's the purpose of multi-factor authentication. Now, when it comes to Microsoft Entra does support multi-factor authentication in both free license as well as in paid license. When it supports multi-factor authentication in free license, the capabilities are limited. It's a plain multi-factor authentication with while you choose an authentication device, an authentication method. However, when you configure it with paid license, it basically creates some difference. So let's understand the multi-factor authentication. First of all, with free license, when you don't have a paid license, and then we will look at multi-factor authentication with a paid license. Okay, so how do we configure multi-factor authentication? So let's imagine for a moment that in this account, that if you want to configure multi-factor authentication using Entra Admin Center, then it has to go for a paid account only. Free account capability you will not find here. So if you want to understand how it is done free of cost, while you don't have access to license, this is how you can do it. So when I want to configure multi-factor authentication on this screen where I have all my users, hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, Raghu.
Okay. So when I have all the users, where I see all the users, I also see an option that says per user MFA. This is the free part, per user MFA. I can click on this option. Earlier, it would redirect me to a different portal, but it seems that now they have deprecated that portal, and now you can directly configure it here because I'm only seeing it, for the first time that this capability is there in the portal. Otherwise, it would always redirect me to a different URL where I would configure it. So it says this is the new per user MFA management experience. For the legacy experience, please click here. So if you want to see how the legacy looked like, I will click here and you will see. This used to be the portal for legacy. This is how it would. So it would bring me to this URL, which is account.activedirectory.windows.azure.com, and here it would populate all my users. And if I want to configure multi-factor authentication for any of these users, let's say I want to configure multi-factor authentication for a user, let's say Radharani, I want to configure multi-factor authentication. So I will select the user. After I select the user, to my right, I see quick steps wherein it says enable and manage user setting. So let's see manage user setting first. When I click on manage user settings, it says required selected user to provide contact methods again. Delete all existing app passwords generated by selected user. Restore multi-factor authentication on remembered devices. We use these options as an additional settings when user is not able to use multi-factor authentication when it is not working. That's what setting is. If you want to enable multi-factor authentication for this user, all you need to do is enable. It says about enabling multi-factor authentication. If your user do not regularly sign in through the browser, you can send them this link to register for multi-factor authentication. So as soon as I enable for multi-factor authentication for this user on next sign-in will be prompted to configure the multi-factor authentication. However, user will still have an option to skip it for a couple of days. So let's see, let me enable multi-factor authentication for this user. So I'm enabling the multi-factor authentication. Now MFA is enabled for this user. If I go back to this user, select this user, I can see MFA is enabled. Now that MFA is enabled, even though the user will have an option to skip MFA for another 14 days. User will get 2 weeks to skip MFA, even though it has been enabled by me as an administrator. If I want to enforce this MFA from next login of this user, for that, I will need to click on enforce. So other than enabling the MFA, I will need to enforce the MFA also for this user. So I'm enforcing the MFA for this user. Now this user will not be able to skip the MFA when this user signs in, right? If you want to enable MFA for multiple users, you can select them like this, multiple checkboxes once, and then you can enable it also. And similarly, for those MFA is enabled, for those whom MFA is enabled for, you can enforce MFA for them also. So let's see the sign-in experience for Radha, and we will do 2 sign-in experience basically. So we have created MFA for Radha. We will also create MFA for, let's say, Shyam Rana. However, for Shyam Rana, we will not enforce the MFA. So first, we will look at the experience of Shyam Rana, for whom MFA is enabled, and then we will go and look the experience of Radha. Let me just refresh because sometimes due to synchronization, it doesn't work. Okay, Shyam, it is enabled, Radha, it is enforced. Great. Let's go back to your directory. Now the same information, as I said, this is the new feature that they have enabled, which is good. Here you can also do the same thing. Just select the user, and on the top you see enable MFA option. And once MFA is enabled, then you will see the enforce MFA option. And you can also see user settings. So those 3 settings are also here, which means it is the same thing. They have just got rid of one domain, one additional page from their website. Okay, so the same options you can also see here. Now let's go ahead and see the experience. But before I see the experience, when I created the user, okay, since I created those users in Azure, I basically used temp password. So I will need to reset the password because I didn't take temp password. So first I'll go to this user, Radha, and we will go ahead and reset the password so that I can get the temp password for the user. So reset password. I got the temp password. I'll copy the temp password and put it on a notepad. Then I will get a temp password for the other user also. I also need the UPN of the user to sign in. So UPN I've got. Similarly, I will take the information for the other user also, which is Shyam Rana, for whom MFA is enabled. So I'll capture the UPN. I'll also capture the password. I've captured it. Next. Now I'll open a browser, a separate browser, let's say Edge. On Edge, I will show you this experience in incognito so that if there is any cookie in the browser from previous session, we can get rid of it. All right, let's see the experience. So first we will log in using Shyam. Okay, let's log in. It will ask you for the password. And it says, your organization requires additional security information. Follow the prompts to download and set up Microsoft Authenticator app. Now, in case of Shyam, though I have not enforced MFA, even though Shyam is not getting an option to skip it, but the default behavior after enabling the MFA is that a user gets up to 14 days to skip it. That's the default behavior, which is similar to security defaults also. However, in this case, Shyam is not getting an option, because if Shyam clicks on use a different account, then it will start the flow once again, the login flow. Or if Shyam clicks on learn more about Microsoft Authenticator app, then it basically opens a documentation that talks about Authenticator app. And if Shyam clicks on next, then Shyam has to go ahead and configure the authentication method with Authenticator app. So Shyam comes here, it basically takes you to mysignin.microsoft.com window, and it needs to configure Authenticator app. When you don't configure the authentication method, which is a feature of paid license, in a free license, it is always with Authenticator app. In a paid license, you can configure the methods also. So now Shyam basically needs to download the Authenticator app and configure it. So in case of Shyam, even enabling the option, it is getting enforced automatically, which is a strange behavior that I see, because at the same time I also see sometimes users get option to skip it. So to be on safer side, what we do, we basically enforce the MFA. That is where we have done this enforcement for Radha. So now we will log in with another account. And since it is enforced in case of Radha, obviously she will not have an option to skip it. She can't skip it. So right now, in both cases, enabled and enforced, you are seeing it getting enforced. But I'm telling you from my experience, this is the reason they have two options, enabled and enforced, because when you enable the MFA, user gets up to 14 days to skip it. However, when you enforce it, user will have to do the MFA on the next login, and user will not be able to skip it. So this is the MFA part. After this, what happens, you're already aware of. You need to download Microsoft Authenticator app. Then you need to add an account, type your work or email address, and then you will get the code. And that code needs to be typed here on the screen so that the app synchronizes with your account. That's the process that they basically follow. Is everyone with me on this? Okay. So, Avishma, do you have any question? All right. So I'll close this, but that was the option which is available when it comes to free. When it
Yeah,
comes to
I do have a question. Sorry, Ravi, I was trying to find the mic. Uh, the question is that I have seen today there was a pop-up that had come in Azure, basically in saying that Microsoft has made it mandatory or something to have this MFA. I don't know whether you have noticed it, but I
that
did get a message, pop-up message.
which is there, I also know that Microsoft is making MFA mandatory, but you still have time. This is still September 30th.
Okay, okay. So
So
after
that,
September 30th, what would happen? We don't have to basically um, set it
so
up separately, or
no. I'm sure MFA is already configured for your user if you're supporting a customer, because it's a default configuration, even available at free of cost in all the tenant. So every customer would have configured it as per the best practices. So you already are doing MFA. However, if you're not doing MFA, in the worst case scenario, I would say that your customer has not configured MFA for you. Then from September 30th onwards, the MFA must be configured. For example, that you will see here, if you navigate to Microsoft 365, admin center, where it says setup, I'll show you. This is for who? This is for Entra admin. Okay. Over here, you can see here, not start configure MFA. So this portion, I'm saying this part, they are going to make it mandatory. MFA configuration, they are going to make it mandatory from September 30th. You don't see that prompt because the moment you log into this portal, you will start to see the prompt, but I can show you. There is an article for it also. Microsoft making MFA mandatory. Over here. They announced it on 15th of August. They say announcing mandatory multi-factor authentication for Azure signing. So this is getting enabled for Azure signing, mandatory options, and the last date preparing the MFA. It says starting in October. You can see, as I said, September 30th would be the last date. So October 1st, you need to do. Starting in October, MFA will be required to sign into Azure portal, Microsoft Entra Admin Center. I'm saying any portal that is authenticating from Entra. Take it this way. Any portal that is authenticating from Entra, MFA will be needed. The enforcement will gradually roll out to all tenants worldwide. The phase will not impact other Azure clients such as Azure CLI, Azure PowerShell, Azure Mobile App. I'm saying it will not impact this IAC solutions. And beginning the early 2025, the gradual enforcement of MFA and sign in for Azure. So I'm saying for Azure UI, for UI portals, UI based portals, it is starting in October. And for non-UI, CUI based, which is CLI, PowerShell, and whatnot, this will be planned in early 2025. So beginning today, Microsoft will send a 60 days advance notice to all Entra global admins by email and through Azure Health Service notifications to start date of enforcement and action required. So in your account, you will also be able to see under Azure Service Health notifications that what is my last date. I'm saying for my account, what is the date for me? When I go to health, not here, service health. Yep, over here. Here you see notifications, basically planned maintenance, health advisory, security advisories. Not coming here, service issues, not history, resource length. So here you see basically the alert. So I'm not seeing that. Probably since we are using the Azure sponsorship pass, which is more of a free kind of a equivalent to free subscription. So they are not bothering about it. They're just showing you that pop-up. But for paid tenants, you will see that information. So give me a moment here. We can try it here. I'll go to my paid tenant. Okay, so this is my paid tenant. Over here, if I go to service health, okay, this is for ensure your interaction with Azure, interacts with Azure Services TLS. So this is another notification. So this is basically comes here in the health advisory. You basically see the notifications which are specifically for you, which are specifically for you, and that could be other customers which it also relates to. For example, I'm getting one, one notification with respect to the retirement here. So here you will see all the notifications, with respect to anything that Microsoft is changing, in my case. So probably since the article says that they are doing it global, it says that starting in October, MFA will be required to sign into all Azure portals. The enforcement will gradually roll out to all tenants worldwide. So probably it will take time for my tenant, my turn to come. That's the reason I'm not seeing that notification. But when I sign in, I will always see that notification. The date is September 30th, and the enforcement begins from October 1st. So you will start to use multi-factor authentication if you have not started doing it. Make sense?
Yeah, got it.
It says security is our top priority. By enforcing MFA for Azure sign-ins, we aim to provide you with the best protection against cyber threats. We appreciate your cooperation and commitment to enhancing the security. So they are making it mandatory, actually. Some customers don't do it. What customers do, they intentionally disable security defaults. Now security default also enforce MFA, because when security default is enabled for a user, is enabled in a tenant, then it gives 14 days of time to all the users to configure MFA. And after 14 days, it makes it mandatory to configure the MFA. So what customers do if they don't want to do MFA, they disable security default. Now nobody can force them for MFA. But now with this setting in place, you will not be able to disable security defaults, or security defaults will be replaced with some other capability wherein it will be mandatory to configure MFA for all member and guest users from day one. That's how it will happen. Okay. So we were on MFA part wherein I showed you the MFA, that how do we configure MFA when we are using a free tenant, when we are not paying for the services, when we are not purchasing license, how do we configure MFA? And in that MFA, I did not get to choose the method, authentication method, that was by default was Microsoft Authenticator. Now I'll show you the paid part. How will I configure the MFA using the paid part? So if I want to configure the MFA using the paid, then I can go to security. In the Azure portal, I can directly navigate to security. Under security, I will see the options wherein first I will need to configure the authentication method. Over here, I see authentication method, and then comes multi-factor authentication. So you will need to first select the authentication methods that you want to enable or certify for your tenant, and then you will need to configure multi-factor authentication. So let's look at authentication methods. So these are my authentication methods that you see. I have passkey, which is a hardware FIDO security. I have Microsoft Authenticator. I have SMS, temporary access pass, hardware-based OAuth tokens, third-party software tokens, video call, voice call, email OTP, and certificate-based authentication. So these are my authentication methods that I will first need to configure for my tenant. So for example, you can see I have Microsoft Authenticator as authentication method configured. How do I configure it? Just click on any of the method and you just need to enable or disable it like this. That's how you need to do, right? You can enable or disable. Now, when you enable the method, by default, all users will be included for that method. It doesn't mean that MFA is configured for the user. It only means that this method is applicable for these users. So you can have separate methods for separate set of users. For example, for some users who actually need hardware-based authentication, you can enable FIDO for them. You can enable it, and then you can select the specific group that they are part of, right? So that it is only enabled for them. If you want to enable for some users other methods, for example, I have email method also enabled, email OTP method enabled over here. And you can see email OTP method is enabled for selected group, and there is no group here. Because when I enabled this method, I did not have any group added. So you can enable the method here. And in the method, I am enabling allow external users to use an email OTP, which is enabled. So you have multiple methods which you can enable on the screen. Once you enable the method, then when you configure the authentication, you can pick and choose those methods. And if a user is configured for multiple methods, let's say I have one user who is part of all the three configurations. I'm saying in all of these methods, I have added all a specific group or some groups, and my user is part of all the groups. My user satisfies all of this, which means my user, when thrown a challenge to do the MFA, will get all the options. My user will receive all the options that my user can pick and choose if I've configured multiple options for my users. So that's the authentication method that you first add. Now you also have additional authentication, external authentication method in preview. Let's see what they are. So you can use external authentication methods also. Over here, I have not yet explored this. So I'll probably explore it first and then come back to you on this, because this is something that they have recently added in preview. So after you configure the authentication method, you can configure, I'm saying you can also configure password protection policies here. Uh, you know, so the password protection policies of Entra, as we were discussing yesterday, when Shiva asked that what if my Entra password protection policies does not align with on-premises Active Directory password policies. If that is the case, then definitely user will find it difficult to log in. The pass-through authentication will fail. So you need to make sure that your password protection policies remain the same. Right now it is configured lockout threshold is 10, which means if I type 10 times incorrect password, 10 times in a row, my account will be locked. Lockout duration is for 60 seconds. It will automatically be unlocked. It will be unlocked in 60 seconds. Custom ban passwords. If I want to ban any password, I can put those passwords here. Those passwords will not be allowed in my environment. Password protection for Windows Server Active Directory is enabled, and mode is audit. It is in audit mode, not enforce mode. So that's where you will configure the password. Then comes registration campaign. Let's leave this. Yeah.
Raghuveer, I had a question here. So for
Yeah.
the password protection, we cannot configure any length and all, right? What is the length of the password that should be minimum adhered to? So such things is not possible in Azure, right?
No, that is absolutely possible. I need to see. It used to be there here only. You can provide the minimum and maximum password strength, password expiration, all that you can configure. By default, it is 60 days, but there used to be a configuration.
Expiration, I agree, but I have not. I have tried to see whether there is something related to the length of the
Oh,
password.
and
Like,
there, it is there. I'll show you. I still remember looking at it. Uh, I have actually not checked this feature for a long time, but give me a moment. Because these things you basically configure once in a while. Password protection. So the same window, enforced. I'll get back to you on this because I remember there is an option to configure the length also. That is why
Okay.
when you create a password, Microsoft says that the password should be a minimum of 15 characters. So you can configure the length also. I'll show you. I'm
Yeah,
not
because
seeing.
I was trying to go through the documentation once because the customer had a requirement to have at least 12 characters. So while trying to browse to the documentation, I did not find anything related to that. At least I was not successful in finding anything related to that.
Let me see that. So this is for Entra domain services managed only. Default policy settings. Says account lockout duration 30 minutes. Number of failed logon attempts 5. Recent 2. Maximum password is 90 days. And minimum password length is 7. Password must meet complexity requirements. So this article is basically for Entra domain service, which is similar to Active Directory on-premises Active Directory domain services. So just give me time for today. I will actually need to check. I remember looking at that configuration somewhere. In fact, for a customer, we have configured it for a minimum length of 15 characters. I just need to check whether we did use CLI for that configuration or was there an option in the portal to do the same. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. So this was about the authentication method, as I was explaining, that we have multiple authentication methods here. So we will define the information with respect to the password. Now let's go back to the. So after you configure the authentication method, then comes multi-factor authentication. Now this is where you can enable multi-factor authentication. There are multiple capabilities that you basically do. In fact, you can configure conditional access policies to basically use multi-factor authentication to ensure that a legitimate sign-in attempt is verified or illegitimate signing attempt is blocked. So that's also possible. So this is the documentation that basically talks about Microsoft Entra multi-factor authentication. I'll share this document with you. Now, what you all need to do, you will need to do this lab number 7. Take it as a home assignment. It's it's self-explanatory that you need to do. Yes, you would require for this lab, you would definitely require the premium license for it. So let's understand what we are doing in this lab basically. So they basically navigate to Entra. In Entra, they search for multi-factor, navigate to multi-factor. You can directly navigate to multi-factor from identity protection and then multi-factor authentication. And then in the multi-factor authentication, you basically navigate to configure. And first you will configure additional MFA settings, which is additional authentication methods. And then here you can configure this multi-factor authentication for users. I'm say for app passwords, allow users to create app passwords to sign in to non-browser apps. You can configure all these additional methods, which is call to phone, text message to phone, notification through mobile app, verification code from mobile app or hardware token. All that you can configure here. Based on your requirements, you see all of those options. You can also configure trusted IPs. These trusted IPs will be skipped for multi-factor authentication. So what we do is at some customers, when users are trying to sign into any application that authenticates with Microsoft Entra, in case where SSO is not configured, however, users are signing in from a trusted IP or from their corporate locations. So you are in office, your office has a public IP. So that public IP is put here. And when you put that public IP here, those users will not be prompted for multi-factor authentication. They can skip multi-factor authentication. That's the feature here. So then you will configure conditional access rule. Now this also, so in this lab, they are configuring multi-factor authentication with the, along with conditional access. However, you will have a separate lab for conditional access also, right? So here they're creating a conditional access policy actually. And that conditional access policy basically says that if user is trying to log in to an application, which is M365, in your case, you can say in applications, you can select Azure Management Portal instead of M365. It says that it would require multi-factor authentication. So that's exactly what they are configuring here. I will talk about conditional access policy tomorrow. That's, that I will start tomorrow's session with. However, you can do this lab, which will create a sample conditional access policy, and that will, and then for the user which is already there in the lab, but you can pick and choose any user which is there in your any member or guest user that you have, and you can configure it. And then once the conditional access policy is configured, configure MFA to be required for login. You can also configure MFA per user MFA. I'm saying exercise 2 is what I have already shown you how we do exercise 2. When I have configured per user MFA over here by using this option, which I've already explained. So exercise 2 task 1 we have already completed. And that says try logging in with this user for whom it is configured so that you can validate. So exercise 2 task 1 and 2 we have already done. Exercise 1 is something that you need to do today as part of your home assignments. And from tomorrow, we will start with conditional access, and there will be some additional lab in which you will do conditional access specific configuration. And we will spend some time talking about conditional access because it's a very critical it's a very critical configuration that you must understand the, the nitty-gritty of, and as well as the best practices around configuring conditional access. So something that we will discuss tomorrow. So with that said, we will close the session here today. Let me know if you have any questions. We've almost reached to the time. Okay, so I would expect all of you to complete the previous labs if you have not already done. We will be talking about some additional services, advanced services that will have the services that we have discussed so far in this week, the kind of coming here and there in bits and pieces. So if you don't understand these concepts that we have done this week, once again, it will be difficult for you to understand what we will be covering the subsequent week and the week after. So make sure that you do the revision and go through the recorded sessions wheresoever needed to make sure that you're on the same page. So with that said, we can close the session for today. Thank you.